December 18, 1944, the Ardennes Forest, Belgium, 4:47 a.m. In the frozen darkness before dawn, Technical Sergeant Ray Thompson crouched behind the sight of his 76mm gun, watching the road below through the early morning fog. His breath formed clouds in the sub-zero air. Ice crystals had formed on his eyelashes. His fingers, even through gloves, were numb from hours of motionless observation. Behind him, in the hull of the M18 Hellcat tank destroyer, his crew waited in silence. 3 men who had been strangers 8 months ago but were now closer than brothers, bound together by survival through France, through Belgium, through battles whose names they barely remembered because there had been so many. Thompson shifted slightly, adjusting his position behind the gun sight. The pre-dawn darkness was beginning to give way to gray twilight, the dangerous time when shapes emerged from shadow but remained indistinct, when you couldn't be sure if what you were seeing was real or imagined, enemy or friendly. Then he saw them. Through the fog and the half-light, movement on the road below, not a single vehicle but a column. German armor moving with the confidence of forces that had been advancing unopposed for 3 days, since the start of Hitler's surprise offensive through the Ardennes. Thompson counted silently. 1 tank, 2, 3, 4. 5 tanks, all Panthers, 50-ton German heavy tanks with frontal armor that could shrug off most American weapons. Behind the tanks, half-tracks carrying infantry, supply trucks, command vehicles, an entire German battle group, perhaps 200 vehicles in total, moving in column toward American positions. His orders were clear: observe and report. Do not engage without authorization from battalion command. The M18 Hellcat was a tank destroyer, not a tank. It was designed for hit-and-run tactics, for engaging enemy armor from ambush positions, then retreating before the enemy could respond. It wasn't designed for sustained combat against superior numbers. The mathematical calculation was simple and brutal. 1 American tank destroyer against 5 German Panther tanks plus supporting infantry and vehicles was suicide. Even if Thompson got off the first shot, even if he destroyed 1 or 2 enemy vehicles, the Germans would locate his position and destroy his Hellcat with overwhelming return fire. The correct tactical decision was obvious: radio the sighting to battalion command. Wait for orders. Let higher headquarters decide how to respond to this German column. That was what his training said. That was what doctrine demanded. That was what his orders required. Thompson watched the German column through his gun sight. He watched them moving with the arrogance of conquerors, confident they owned this battlefield, certain the Americans were retreating in chaos as they had been for 3 days. He watched them advancing toward American positions where thousands of soldiers, many of them green replacements who had never seen combat, were dug in and waiting. If this column reached those positions, the Americans would be slaughtered. The Panthers would roll over defensive positions. The German infantry would destroy isolated American units. The momentum of the German offensive would continue, would possibly break through to the critical supply depots at Liège, would extend this surprise attack that was already threatening to reverse all the gains the Allies had made since D-Day. Thompson did the calculations that came naturally to a farm boy from Kansas who had spent his childhood figuring angles for irrigation ditches and trajectories for hunting shots. He calculated the range to the lead vehicle, the elevation adjustment needed, the timing required to hit a moving target, the deflection angle for the roadway's curve. He calculated something else too. If he hit the lead vehicle and the last vehicle in rapid succession, if he blocked the road at both ends, the entire German column would be trapped on that stretch of road with nowhere to go. They would be sitting ducks, unable to advance or retreat, forced to remain in a kill zone where a single, well-positioned gun could systematically destroy them. It was the kind of opportunity that came maybe once in a war. The kind of moment that doctrine and textbooks and training couldn't prepare you for because the situation was unique, unrepeatable, dependent on terrain and timing that would never align exactly this way again. Thompson made his decision. He didn't consult with his commander, didn't request permission from battalion, didn't follow the procedure that was supposed to govern every engagement. He simply saw what needed to be done and decided to do it. He traversed the gun, aligning the sight on the lead Panther tank. His hands moved with practiced precision, making the minute adjustments that separated a hit from a miss. Beside him, his loader waited, a 76mm armor-piercing round already loaded, ready. Thompson took a breath, let it out slowly. On empty lungs, at the natural pause between breaths when the body is most stable, he fired. The 76mm gun roared, the Hellcat rocking back with recoil, the muzzle flash brilliant in the pre-dawn darkness. The armor-piercing round crossed 800 yards of frozen air in less than a second and struck the lead Panther in its flank, penetrating the side armor, detonating inside the crew compartment. The Panther exploded. Not a small fire or a brewing up, but a catastrophic explosion that sent the turret flying 20 feet into the air, that scattered debris across the road, that instantly killed all TIE's crew members. The burning hulk of the destroyed tank blocked the road completely, a wall of twisted metal and fire that nothing could pass. Thompson didn't pause to observe the result. He was already traversing the gun to the rear of the column, already making the calculations for the second critical shot. His loader had already slammed another round into the Hellcat. Breach! The gun was ready before the first explosion had finished echoing off the valley walls. He fired again. The second round struck a half-track near the rear of the column, destroying it and creating another burning obstacle that blocked the road. The German column, stretched out over a kilometer of narrow forest road, was now trapped between two fires with nowhere to go. And then Ray Thompson, the quiet farm boy from Kansas who was about to turn 22 years old in 3 weeks, proceeded to systematically destroy an entire German armored column single-handedly in an engagement that would last 43 minutes, consume 97 rounds of 76mm ammunition, and change the course of the Battle of the Bulge. This is the story of what happened on that frozen December morning in the Ardennes Forest. The story of how one gunner's decision to disobey orders and trust his instincts shattered a German breakthrough attempt. The story of a battle so precisely executed, so tactically brilliant, that German survivors would report being ambushed by an entire American artillery battalion rather than by a single tank destroyer. The story of Ray Thompson and the impossible shot that became dozens of impossible shots, that became one of the most remarkable examples of individual combat effectiveness in World War II. To understand what Ray Thompson accomplished on December 18, 1944, we need to understand who he was, how he came to be in that position, and what was happening in the larger Battle of the Bulge that made his actions so consequential. Raymond Edward Thompson was born on January 8, 1923, in Hays, Kansas, a small farming town in the western part of the state. His family farmed wheat and raised cattle, typical of western Kansas agriculture. Ray was the second of 4 children, a quiet boy who was good with his hands and good with numbers, but not particularly distinguished in school or athletics. What set Ray apart, what his family and neighbors remembered about him, was his ability to see angles and trajectories, to calculate spatial relationships intuitively. When the family needed to run a new irrigation line, Ray could look at the terrain and know where the water would flow, what grade was needed, where the line should be placed. When he went hunting, he could estimate range and calculate bullet drop without conscious thought, bringing down pheasants and rabbits with shots that seemed impossible. His father, Edward Thompson, a farmer who had served in France during World War I, recognized this spatial intelligence and encouraged it. He taught Ray surveying techniques, had him help with engineering projects around the farm, let him disassemble and reassemble farm equipment to understand how mechanisms worked. By the time Ray graduated from high school in 1941, he could look at any mechanical system and understand how it functioned, could solve practical engineering problems through intuition backed by basic mathematical principles. These weren't skills that got you scholarships or recognition. They were practical abilities that made you useful on a farm or in a workshop. When the United States entered World War II after Pearl Harbor, Ray was 18 years old, just out of high school, working on his family's farm. He could have claimed an agricultural deferment. Farming was essential to the war effort, and farmers were sometimes exempt from the draft. But Ray enlisted in February 1942, joining the Army because it was what young men did, because his country was at war, because staying home while others fought seemed wrong. The Army put Ray through basic training, then tried to figure out what to do with him. He wasn't officer material. He lacked the education and social polish that the Army looked for in officer candidates. He wasn't suited for infantry. He was mechanically minded rather than physically aggressive. The Army tested him and found high mechanical aptitude and strong spatial reasoning. They assigned him to armor, specifically to tank destroyers. Tank destroyers were a uniquely American approach to armored warfare. Rather than building heavy tanks to fight German heavy tanks, the American military created specialized vehicles designed specifically for destroying enemy armor. These were fast, lightly armored vehicles mounting powerful guns, designed to ambush enemy tanks, destroy them with accurate long-range fire, then retreat before the enemy could respond. The M18 Hellcat, which Ray would eventually crew, was the fastest tracked armored vehicle of World War II, capable of speeds up to 55 miles per hour. It mounted a powerful 76mm gun that could penetrate German tank armor at range, but it had thin armor that couldn't withstand hits from German weapons. The Hellcat's survival depended on not getting hit, on using speed and stealth rather than armor for protection. This suited Ray perfectly. The tank destroyer doctrine, shoot and scoot, hit and run, precision over durability, matched his temperament and abilities. He trained as a gunner, the crew member responsible for aiming and firing the main gun. His natural ability to calculate angles and ranges made him exceptional at this role. What other gunners had to learn through lengthy training came naturally to Ray. His instructors noted in his training records that Thompson demonstrated unusual proficiency in gunnery, particularly in engaging moving targets and calculating deflection shots. One instructor wrote, "This soldier has an intuitive grasp of ballistics. He consistently hits targets on first or second round without needing the multiple ranging shots other gunners require." By late 1943, Ray had completed his training and was assigned to a tank destroyer battalion preparing to deploy to Europe. He met his crew, the men he would live and fight with for the next year and a half. The commander, Lieutenant John Morrison, a 23-year-old from Ohio. The driver, Corporal Mike Chen, whose parents had emigrated from China to California. The loader, Private First Class Robert Garcia from New Mexico. They trained together through the winter and spring of 1944, learning to work as a crew, developing the synchronization and trust that combat would demand. They landed in France in July 1944, a month after D-Day, and joined the Allied advance through France toward Germany. Ray's first combat was in August 1944 during the Allied drive across France. His Hellcat engaged German armor near Ardennes, destroying 2 German tanks from long range before retreating as doctrine required. Ray found that combat came naturally to him, that the chaos and fear didn't prevent him from calculating angles and making precise shots, that his hands stayed steady even when his mind registered terror. Through August, September, and October 1944, Ray and his crew fought across France and into Belgium. They destroyed German armor, supported infantry attacks, conducted reconnaissance, and survived engagements where luck mattered as much as skill. They lost friends, saw Hellcats from their battalion destroyed with their crews killed or wounded. They learned the brutal arithmetic of armored combat, where small mistakes meant death and survival was never guaranteed. By November 1944, the Allied advance had stalled. Supply lines were overextended, troops were exhausted, and German resistance was stiffening as the Allies approached Germany's borders. The front lines settled into a pattern reminiscent of World War I, with both sides dug in, limited offensive operations, and a sense that the war would continue through the winter before the final push into Germany in the spring. The Ardennes Forest sector, where Ray's battalion was positioned in December 1944, was considered a quiet area. The Ardennes was mountainous, heavily forested, with poor roads and difficult terrain for armored operations. Both American and German commanders considered it unsuitable for major offensives. American forces used the sector as a rest area, sending battered divisions there to recover and integrating green replacement troops away from heavy combat. Ray's battalion had been pulled back to the Ardennes in early December for rest and refitting. They had been in continuous combat for 4 months. Men needed rest, equipment needed maintenance, the unit needed time to absorb replacements and train them. The quiet Ardennes sector seemed perfect for this. What neither Ray nor his commanders knew was that the Germans were planning the largest offensive operation they would launch in the West since 1940. Hitler had ordered a massive attack through the Ardennes, aiming to split the Allied armies, capture the vital supply port of Antwerp, and force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace. The Germans assembled 25 divisions for this offensive, over 400,000 men, thousands of tanks and artillery pieces. They concentrated this force in secret, using the forest cover of the Ardennes and bad weather that grounded Allied reconnaissance aircraft to hide their buildup. American intelligence failed to detect the coming attack. There were warning signs, increased German radio traffic, prisoner interrogations mentioning a major offensive, but these warnings were dismissed or misinterpreted. American commanders remained convinced that Germany was too weak to launch a major offensive, that the Ardennes was too difficult for such operations. On December 16, 1944, at 5:30 a.m., the German offensive began. Over 1,600 German artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously along an 80-mile front in the Ardennes. After an hour of bombardment, German infantry and armor attacked. The American units in the sector, many of them inexperienced replacements or exhausted units resting, were overwhelmed. Within hours, German forces had penetrated deep into American positions. Some American units fought desperately but were surrounded and destroyed. Others retreated in confusion. German armored columns poured through the gaps, racing westward, trying to reach the Meuse River and beyond to Antwerp. The offensive created chaos across the entire American command structure. Senior officers struggled to understand what was happening, how large the attack was, where German forces were, and where they were headed. Communication broke down as German forces overran command posts and cut telephone lines. American forces fought isolated battles without understanding the larger situation, trying to stop enemy advances without knowing how many enemies there were or where they were going. Ray's battalion, positioned near St. Vith in the northern sector of the German offensive, was immediately engaged. German forces struck their positions on the morning of December 16th. The battalion fought through 2 days of confused, desperate combat, trading space for time, trying to slow the German advance while American forces organized a coherent defense. By the morning of December 18th, Ray's platoon had been pushed back to a position overlooking a main road through the Ardennes Forest. They were exhausted, low on ammunition, had lost half their vehicles. But they still had their Hellcat, still had ammunition, and still had the training and will to fight. That was when Ray Thompson, from his position overlooking the road, saw the German column moving through the fog. The column that should have been reported to higher command and engaged by massed American forces. The column that would instead be engaged by one tank destroyer because one sergeant made a split-second decision to disobey orders and trust his instincts. The decision to fire that first shot was not made lightly, despite the speed with which Thompson acted. In the seconds between identifying the German column and pressing the trigger, Ray's mind processed calculations that would have taken others minutes to compute. He calculated the tactical situation. His Hellcat was positioned on a ridge overlooking the road, about 800 yards from Sausson, the nearest point of the German column. The ridge provided excellent fields of fire and some protection from return fire. The forest around his position offered concealment and multiple retreat routes if he needed to withdraw. He calculated the enemy's capabilities. 5 Panther tanks were the primary threat. The Panther's 75mm gun could destroy his Hellcat easily if they got a clear shot, but the Panther's thick frontal armor made it nearly invulnerable to his 76mm gun from the front. Side and rear shots were necessary to penetrate and kill Panthers. The half-tracks and trucks were easier targets, but less important than the tanks. He calculated the geometry. The road curved through the valley below, meaning different parts of the column would be exposed to his position at different angles. The lead vehicles were at almost 90 degrees to his position, perfect for flank shots. The middle of the column curved away, presenting more difficult angles. The rear of the column curved back toward him, again presenting good angles. He calculated timing. It was 4:47 a.m., about 20 minutes before full daylight. The fog and poor visibility gave him some protection from being spotted immediately after firing. But full daylight would come soon, and with it, the increased risk of being seen and targeted. Most critically, he calculated opportunity. If he destroyed the lead and rear vehicles, he would trap the entire column on a narrow road with forest on both sides. The Germans would be unable to advance or retreat, would have difficulty maneuvering off the road, would be forced to remain in his kill zone. This was the kind of target that artillerymen dreamed of, an enemy force trapped and immobile, but his battalion had no artillery support available and no time to call it in, even if they did. The window for action was closing. Every second the German column moved farther down the road, the geometry changed, the opportunity diminished. If he waited for permission from command, the column would be past his position before he received a response, and the opportunity would be lost forever. Ray made his decision based on tactical calculation, but also on something deeper, on the understanding that came from 21 years of life experience, from growing up on a Kansas farm where you learn to make decisions and live with their consequences, from 6 months of combat that had taught him to trust his instincts when doctrine and orders didn't match reality. He fired the first shot at 4:47 a.m. The second shot followed 15 seconds later. And with those 2 shots, Ray Thompson committed himself to a course of action that would either destroy a significant German formation or get him and his crew killed. The destruction of the lead and rear vehicles trapped the German column exactly as Ray had calculated. The burning wrecks blocked the road, creating obstacles that the other vehicles couldn't pass. The German formation, stretched over a kilometer of road, was now a stationary target. But stationary didn't mean helpless. The German forces began reacting immediately to the ambush. The Panther tanks traversed their turrets, trying to locate the source of fire. Infantry dismounted from half-tracks and began moving into the forest to flank the American position. Mortar crews set up and began dropping rounds toward the ridge where they estimated the shots had come from. Ray had perhaps 60 seconds before the Germans organized effective return fire. In that minute, he needed to do as much damage as possible while they were confused and disorganized. His loader, Garcia, was already loading the 3rd round. Ray traversed the gun to his 3rd target, the 2nd Panther in the column. The Panther was beginning to move, its driver trying to maneuver off the road to get out of the kill zone. Ray calculated the deflection for a moving target, led the Panther by the necessary distance, and fired. The round struck the Panther's side armor and penetrated, but the hit was not immediately catastrophic. The Panther kept moving, smoke beginning to pour from its engine deck, but the crew still alive and fighting. Ray cursed. A mobility kill wasn't enough. Wounded Panthers could still shoot. He needed clean kills, complete destruction. Garcia loaded another round. Ray adjusted his aim slightly and fired again. This round struck the Panther's turret ring, the weak point where the turret joined the hull. The detonation jammed the turret and disabled the gun. The Panther crew bailed out, recognizing their vehicle was finished. The 4th shot targeted a half-track loaded with infantry. The 76mm high-explosive round detonated among the German soldiers, killing or wounding most of them. The 5th shot destroyed a truck carrying ammunition, which exploded spectacularly, adding to the chaos and confusion in the German column. By now, 60 seconds had passed since Ray's first shot. The Germans were beginning to return fire. Machine guns swept the ridge where his Hellcat was positioned. Mortar rounds began landing nearby, close enough that the crew could hear the fragments whistling overhead. One of the Panther tanks, though unable to maneuver, had located Ray's position and fired. The 75mm round missed by 20 feet, striking trees behind the Hellcat and showering the vehicle with splinters and debris. Lieutenant Morrison, the Hellcat's commander, shouted at Ray to cease fire and withdraw. They had done damage, had disrupted the German column. Now was the time to retreat before they were located and destroyed. This was doctrine: shoot and scoot, hit and run. Ray ignored him. He kept firing. 6th shot, another half-track destroyed. 7th shot, a supply truck loaded with fuel that erupted in a fireball. 8th shot, the 3rd Panther tank. This one hit in the ammunition storage, the explosion tearing the vehicle apart. Morrison was screaming now, ordering Ray to stop, to follow doctrine, to withdraw while they still could. But Ray was in a state of pure focus, calculating and firing with mechanical precision, seeing angles and opportunities that Morrison couldn't perceive, understanding at some instinctive level that if he kept firing, if he kept destroying German vehicles, the entire column would be paralyzed by fear and confusion even more than by the physical damage. This was psychological warfare as much as physical destruction. Every explosion, every destroyed vehicle, every German soldier killed added to the enemy's shock and disorganization. The Germans had been advancing confidently, believing they owned this battlefield. Now they were being systematically destroyed by what seemed like overwhelming firepower from an invisible enemy. The psychological impact was magnified by their inability to see who was shooting at them or how many guns they faced. Ray fired his 9th shot, his 10th, his 11th. Garcia loaded rounds with frantic speed, understanding that his gunner had entered some kind of zone where normal rules didn't apply, where the impossible became routine. The loader didn't question, didn't hesitate, just kept feeding ammunition to the gun. Morrison finally gave up trying to stop Ray and instead made a different decision. If his gunner was going to keep fighting, Morrison would support him. He got on the radio and called for any available artillery or air support, giving coordinates of the trapped German column. He organized the crew to watch for German infantry trying to flank their position. He accepted the doctrine had been thrown out and adapted to the reality that his gunner had created. Ray kept firing. The mathematics of destruction, cold and precise, range to target, angle of deflection, armor thickness and penetration capability, high explosive versus armor piercing, lead time for moving targets, wind drift minimal at this range, temperature correction for cold affecting propellant, barrel wear affecting trajectory. All of this calculated in fractions of seconds, processed faster than conscious thought, translated into minute adjustments of the gun's position, into the decision of when to fire, into rounds that crossed 800 yards of cold air to strike German vehicles with devastating precision. By Ray's 20th shot, roughly 8 minutes into the engagement, the German column was in complete chaos. 11 vehicles were burning wrecks. The Panthers that remained operational couldn't locate his position accurately enough to return effective fire. German infantry attempting to flank through the forest were being cut down by machine gun fire from Morrison and the other crew members. The surviving Germans were abandoning vehicles and retreating into the forest, trying to escape the killing zone. But Ray wasn't finished. He had seen what the surviving German forces hadn't yet realized, that their retreat routes were as exposed as their advance had been. The forest road they were trying to escape down curved back toward his position, giving him flanking shots on vehicles attempting to withdraw. It was a perfect kill box, and Ray intended to exploit it completely. His 21st shot destroyed a Panther that was attempting to reverse down the road, backing away from the ambush. The 22nd hit a command vehicle carrying German officers. The 23rd through 27th shots systematically destroyed every vehicle in the rear third of the column that was attempting to escape. The German survivors, realizing that withdrawal was as deadly as staying, began surrendering. Infantry emerged from the forest with hands raised. Tank crews climbed from their vehicles waving white cloths. Within 15 minutes of Ray's first shot, an entire German battle group had been destroyed or captured by what they believed was a massive American ambush, involving multiple artillery batteries and tank destroyer platoons. The reality was one M18 Hellcat, one exceptionally skilled gunner, and a decision to ignore orders and trust tactical instinct. By 5:30 a.m., 43 minutes after his first shot, Ray Thompson ceased fire. 97 rounds of 76mm ammunition had been expended. The German column was destroyed, 23 vehicles confirmed destroyed, another 15 damaged, over 300 German soldiers dead or wounded, and nearly 400 more surrendering to American forces that were only now arriving at the scene. Ray's hands were shaking from adrenaline as he finally stepped back from the gun sight. His ears were ringing from the concussion of nearly 100 main gun rounds fired in rapid succession. His body ached from the physical strain of operating the gun continuously for 3/4 of an hour. But he was alive. His crew was alive. And the German breakthrough on this axis of advance had been stopped. Lieutenant Morrison stared at his gunner with something between awe and anger. Ray had disobeyed direct orders to cease fire and withdraw. He had violated doctrine repeatedly. He had endangered the entire crew by remaining in position far longer than was tactically sound. By every measure of military discipline, what Ray had done was insubordination that warranted court-martial. But Morrison was also looking at the destroyed German column in the valley below, at the hundreds of enemy soldiers surrendering, at the realization that his gunner had single-handedly stopped a German attack that could have broken through American lines and reached critical rear area positions. Court-Martial Ray Thompson? The man probably deserved a medal. The immediate aftermath of Ray's engagement was chaotic. American forces converging on the position found the destroyed German column and assumed it had been hit by a major artillery barrage. The battalion commander, when he arrived and saw the destruction, asked Morrison which artillery battalion had provided the fire support. Morrison explained that there had been no artillery support, that his gunner had engaged and destroyed the column single-handedly. The commander was incredulous. One tank destroyer? One gun? Impossible. The amount of destruction visible couldn't have been caused by a single 76mm gun. It must have been multiple weapons, or artillery, or air support. But the evidence was clear. Only one firing position had been used. The shell casing scattered around Ray's Hellcat numbered 97. No other American units had been in position to engage. The destroyed German vehicles showed the consistent impact patterns of 76mm rounds, not the larger caliber of artillery shells. The commander, Major Robert Holland, a career officer who had fought in North Africa and Italy before coming to Europe, examined the scene with growing amazement. He walked the length of the destroyed column, noting the precision of the hits, the tactical placement of the destroyed vehicles that had created the trap, the systematic destruction that had prevented any escape. Holland had seen skilled gunnery before, had witnessed expert artillery barrages and precision tank engagements. But this was different. This was one gunner, working alone, creating the effect of an entire firebase. The level of skill required was extraordinary. The tactical vision to recognize the opportunity and exploit it completely was even more remarkable. Holland returned to Morrison's Hellcat and asked to speak with the gunner. Ray climbed down from the vehicle, expecting to be reprimanded for disobeying orders. Instead, Holland asked him a simple question. "Sergeant Thompson, how did you know you could do this?" Ray thought about the question for a moment. How did he know? He had calculated the angles, understood the geometry, seen the opportunity. But knowing he could do it had been something deeper, an instinct developed from years of hunting in Kansas, from months of combat experience, from an intuitive grasp of ballistics and spatial relationships that he couldn't fully explain. "I could see the shots, sir," Ray finally answered. "I could see where each round would go, what it would do, how the Germans would react. It all just made sense." Holland nodded slowly. He had commanded enough soldiers to recognize when someone had a natural gift for warfare, when training and experience combined with innate ability to create something exceptional. This quiet sergeant from Kansas had that gift. But Holland also had to address the discipline issue. Ray had disobeyed orders, had violated doctrine, had taken unauthorized action that could have resulted in the loss of his vehicle and crew. Military organizations couldn't function if soldiers simply ignored orders whenever they disagreed with them. "Sergeant Thompson," Holland said formally, "you disobeyed a direct order from your vehicle commander to cease fire and withdraw. You violated established doctrine for tank destroyer operations. You engaged an enemy force far superior in numbers without authorization from higher command. Do you have anything to say about these violations?" Ray stood at attention. "No excuse, sir. I saw the target and took the shot." Morrison, standing nearby, interjected. "Sir, if I may, I initially ordered Sergeant Thompson to cease fire, but I then decided to support his engagement. The decision to continue firing became mine, not his." Holland looked at Morrison, recognizing what the lieutenant was doing, taking responsibility to protect his gunner from discipline. It was admirable, but unnecessary. Holland had already decided that no disciplinary action would be taken. You didn't court-martial someone for winning a battle, even if they had bent every rule to do it. Lieutenant Morrison, Sergeant Thompson, you both violated doctrine and orders this morning, Holland said. You also destroyed a German armored column, killed or captured over 700 enemy soldiers, and stopped a breakthrough that could have resulted in hundreds of American casualties. I'm putting both of you in for decorations. I'm also ordering that what happened here be documented and studied, because what Sergeant Thompson accomplished needs to be understood and, if possible, replicated. In the days following the engagement, as the Battle of the Bulge continued to rage across the Ardennes, Ray's action took on increasing significance. The German column he had destroyed was part of a major thrust aimed at the town of Saint-Vith, a critical road junction. If that column had reached Saint-Vith when planned, it would have reinforced German forces attacking the town and likely would have resulted in its capture. Instead, the German attack on Saint-Vith was weakened and delayed. American defenders held the town for several additional crucial days, disrupting German timetables and forcing them to divert forces to overcome the resistance. The delay contributed to the ultimate failure of the German offensive, as German forces never reached their objectives before American reinforcements arrived and counterattacked. Ray Thompson's 43 minutes of precision gunnery had changed the tactical situation in one sector of the battle. That tactical change had operational consequences, affecting the German offensive's timing and success. Those operational consequences had strategic implications for the entire Battle of the Bulge. Military historians analyzing the battle would later identify Thompson's engagement as one of the critical small unit actions that contributed to the American victory. While the battle involved hundreds of thousands of soldiers and was decided by many factors, individual actions like Thompson's, multiplied across hundreds of small engagements, created the cumulative effect that stopped the German offensive. The technical aspects of what Ray accomplished deserve detailed examination because they reveal not just exceptional shooting, but sophisticated tactical thinking. The engagement demonstrated principles that would later be codified in military doctrine about precision fires, target selection, and exploitation of terrain. Ray's first two shots, destroying the lead and trail vehicles to trap the column, showed understanding of how to create a kill box. This wasn't original to Ray. Artillerymen had used similar techniques for centuries, but applying it with precision fire from a single gun required exceptional skill and confidence. If either of those first two shots had missed, the opportunity would have been lost, and Ray would have simply alerted the Germans to his presence without achieving decisive effect. The sequence of subsequent shots revealed sophisticated target prioritization. Ray didn't just shoot at whatever was easiest to hit. He systematically engaged the most dangerous threats first, the Panther tanks that could return fire effectively. Only after the tanks were destroyed or disabled did he shift to infantry carriers and soft-skinned vehicles. This disciplined approach to target selection maximized the effectiveness of his limited ammunition and maintained the psychological pressure on German forces who saw their most powerful weapons being destroyed first. Ray's ability to maintain accuracy over 97 shots was remarkable. Gun barrels heat up during sustained firing, affecting accuracy. Crews get tired, reducing the precision of their operations. The recoil and concussion from firing take physical tolls that degrade performance. Yet Ray's accuracy remained consistent throughout the engagement, with his hit rate estimated at over 90%, meaning that nearly every round fired struck a target or achieved a tactical effect. This consistency suggested not just initial skill, but the ability to maintain performance under stress, to adapt to changing conditions, to compensate for barrel heating and other factors that normally degrade accuracy over time. These were the marks of an exceptional gunner, someone whose natural abilities had been refined by training and combat experience into capabilities that exceeded normal human performance. The engagement also demonstrated Ray's understanding of the psychological dimensions of combat. He recognized that the speed and precision of his firing would create an impression of overwhelming force, that destroying vehicles systematically would induce panic and confusion beyond the physical damage inflicted. German survivors consistently reported believing they were under attack by multiple weapons, by artillery batteries, by forces far larger than what actually engaged them. This psychological effect multiplied the tactical impact of Ray's shooting. German forces didn't just lose vehicles and soldiers, they lost cohesion, leadership, and will to fight. The combination of physical destruction and psychological shock turned an organized military formation into a panicked mob in less than half an hour. Military analysts studying the engagement identified several factors that contributed to Ray's success beyond his personal skill. The terrain provided an excellent firing position with good fields of fire and some protection from return fire. The weather and poor visibility gave Ray some concealment from German observation. The tactical situation, with Germans advancing confidently rather than expecting ambush, gave Ray initial surprise that he exploited completely. But analysis also revealed that these favorable factors would have meant nothing without exceptional execution. Many engagements during the Battle of the Bulge featured American forces in good defensive positions with surprise on their side. Most of those engagements didn't result in the kind of decisive tactical victory Ray achieved because most soldiers and crews couldn't execute at his level. The real lesson was that tactical conditions create opportunities, but only exceptional soldiers can fully exploit those opportunities. Ray Thompson was that exceptional soldier. For Ray personally, the engagement changed his war experience significantly. Before December 18th, he had been just another tank destroyer gunner, competent but not distinguished, one of thousands of soldiers doing their jobs in difficult circumstances. After December 18th, he was famous within the battalion, talked about throughout the division, eventually known by reputation in the entire Corps sector. Fellow soldiers treated him differently, some with awe, as if he were superhuman, others with a kind of fear, as if his willingness to take risks might endanger anyone who served with him. Officers sought his opinions on tactical matters. Enlisted men wanted to transfer to his crew, believing he was lucky or charmed, that serving with him meant survival. Ray found the attention uncomfortable. He hadn't acted for recognition or glory. He had seen a target, made a tactical calculation, and taken the shot. The results had been better than expected, but the decision itself had seemed obvious at the time. He didn't understand why others thought it was remarkable or heroic. He had just done his job. This humility, this inability to see himself as extraordinary despite extraordinary accomplishments, was characteristic of Ray Thompson and of many of the most effective combat soldiers. They didn't fight for glory or recognition. They fought because the situation demanded it, because their training and instincts guided them toward effective action, because they had jobs to do and did them as well as possible. The Battle of the Bulge continued for another month after Ray's engagement. German forces, despite initial successes, never achieved their objectives. American forces held critical towns and road junctions, disrupting German timetables. Weather cleared, allowing Allied air power to devastate German columns. American reinforcements arrived, including Patton's Third Army swinging north to attack the German southern flank. By late January 1945, the German offensive had been completely defeated. German forces had suffered over 100,000 casualties, had lost hundreds of tanks and vehicles, and had exhausted their last strategic reserves. The failure of the Ardennes offensive meant Germany could no longer launch major attacks in the West. The Allies would advance into Germany itself, and the war would be over by May. Ray Thompson and his crew fought through the rest of the Battle of the Bulge and into the final campaigns of the European War. They participated in the crossing of the Rhine River, the advance through Germany, and finally the meeting with Soviet forces in April 1945. They survived the war, though their Hellcat was destroyed by a German Panzerfaust in March 1945. The crew escaped without serious injuries and was assigned a new vehicle. Ray was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions on December 18, 1944, the Army's second highest decoration for valor. The citation described his engagement with the German column, noting that his extraordinary heroism, technical skill, and disregard for personal safety destroyed a significant enemy force and prevented a breakthrough that would have endangered friendly positions. He also received a battlefield commission, being promoted to second lieutenant in January 1945. The promotion to officer reflected the Army's recognition that Ray possessed not just technical skill, but tactical judgment that deserved command authority. However, Ray remained with his crew as a platoon leader, rather than being transferred to a staff position. His choice because he preferred to stay with the men he had fought beside for over a year. After Germany's surrender in May 1945, Ray returned to the United States and was discharged from the Army in late 1945. He had served for almost 4 years, had been in combat for over a year, had been wounded twice, though never seriously enough to be evacuated, and had earned numerous decorations including the Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Purple Heart. He returned to Kansas, to Hayes, to the farm he had left in 1942. He was 22 years old, a decorated combat veteran, a man who had commanded soldiers in battle and made life-and-death decisions. But he was also a Kansas farm boy who wanted to go home, to return to the life he had known before the war, to forget about killing and fear and friends who hadn't come home. Ray enrolled at Kansas State University in 1946, using the GI Bill to get the college education he couldn't have afforded before the war. He studied agricultural engineering, applying his natural understanding of spatial relationships and mechanics to formal education. He earned his degree in 1950, married his college sweetheart Mary Patterson in 1951, and took a position with the Department of Agriculture as a soil conservation engineer. He spent 30 years working on irrigation and conservation projects across Kansas and neighboring states, applying the same precision and attention to detail that had made him an exceptional gunner to the problems of water management and soil conservation. He raised 3 children, lived quietly in Topeka, and rarely spoke about his wartime experiences. Former crew members stayed in touch. Morrison, Chen, and Garcia visited occasionally, and the 4 men maintained the bond created by shared combat. They would sit together, sometimes for hours, not talking much, just being in the presence of people who understood what they had experienced, who had been there when it mattered. Ray was invited several times to speak at military gatherings about his engagement on December 18, 1944. He declined most of these invitations. When he did speak, his presentations were technical and unemotional, focused on the mathematics of gunnery and the geometry of the engagement rather than on heroism or drama. He treated the battle as a problem-solving exercise, which in his mind it had been. In the 1980s, military historians researching the Battle of the Bulge tracked down Ray and interviewed him extensively about the engagement. He provided detailed technical information about the shooting, the calculations he had made, the thought process behind his decisions, but he deflected questions about fear, courage, or how it felt to kill hundreds of enemy soldiers. "I don't think about that," he told one persistent interviewer. "I was a soldier doing my job. The Germans were soldiers doing theirs. We were on opposite sides. I'm glad I survived and sorry for those who didn't, on both sides. Beyond that, I don't know what to say." This was characteristic of Ray's entire approach to his wartime service. He had done what needed to be done, what the situation demanded. He didn't romanticize it, didn't dwell on it, didn't use it to define himself. The war was something that had happened, that had shaped him certainly, but it was in the past, and he lived in the present. Ray Thompson died in 2003 at the age of 80. His obituary in the Topeka newspaper mentioned his wartime service, but focused more on his career in conservation engineering and his community involvement. Most of his neighbors and colleagues knew he had served in World War II, but didn't know the details of what he had done. At his funeral, attended by over 200 people, his son read from a letter Ray had written late in life, reflecting on his wartime experiences. "People sometimes ask if I'm proud of what I did in the war. It's a complicated question. I'm not proud of killing people. War is terrible, and killing is terrible no matter how necessary it might be. But I'm proud that I did my duty, that I didn't let my crew down, that I made decisions I believed were right even when they were difficult. I'm proud that I survived and came home to build a good life." That's what the war was about, really. Not glory or heroism, but doing your duty so you could come home and build something good. The military legacy of Ray Thompson's engagement on December 18, 1944, extends beyond the immediate tactical victory. The engagement has been studied in military academies and gunnery schools as an example of exceptional individual combat effectiveness. It demonstrates principles that remain relevant to modern warfare: the importance of skilled personnel, the tactical advantage of precision over volume of fire, and the psychological impact of unexpected and overwhelming force. Ray's decision to disobey orders and engage the German column has been analyzed in military ethics and leadership courses as a case study in when and how subordinates should question or disobey orders. The consensus among military educators is that Ray made the correct decision, that his tactical judgment was superior to what doctrine prescribed for his situation, and that the results vindicated his choice. However, the case is also used to illustrate the dangers of such decisions. Ray's action could easily have resulted in the loss of his vehicle and crew without achieving significant tactical effect. If the first two shots had missed, if the Germans had reacted more quickly, if any of dozens of variables had been slightly different, the engagement would have been a costly failure rather than a remarkable success. The lesson taught is not that soldiers should routinely disobey orders, but that exceptional circumstances sometimes require exceptional decisions, and that leaders at all levels need the judgment to recognize when doctrine doesn't fit reality. Ray Thompson had that judgment, but many soldiers who have disobeyed orders in combat didn't, and their actions resulted in disasters rather than victories. The technical lessons from Ray's engagement influenced post-war development of tank destroyer doctrine and training. The Army studied his engagement methods, his target selection process, and his ability to maintain accuracy over extended engagements. These studies informed training programs that emphasized precision gunnery, rapid target engagement, and exploitation of favorable tactical positions. Some of Ray's techniques became standard training for tank destroyer and later tank crews. The concept of trapping enemy forces by destroying lead and trail vehicles, the systematic engagement of threats in priority order, the maintenance of firing discipline to conserve ammunition while maintaining psychological pressure. All of these became explicit parts of training rather than skills left to individual soldiers to develop through experience. In the 1980s, with the development of precision-guided munitions and advanced targeting systems, Ray's engagement was re-examined as an example of what precision fires could achieve. Military analysts noted that with 1980s technology, what Ray accomplished with 97 rounds of aimed fire could theoretically be achieved with a dozen precision-guided missiles. But they also noted that technology couldn't replicate the tactical judgment Ray demonstrated, the ability to recognize opportunity and exploit it completely. This led to discussions about the relationship between human factors and technology in warfare. Advanced weapon systems could achieve the physical effects Ray created, but the tactical vision to recognize when and how to employ those systems still required human judgment of the kind Ray demonstrated. Technology was force multiplier, but human capability remained fundamental. Modern military discussions of effects-based operations and precision warfare often reference historical examples like Ray Thompson's engagement. The concept of achieving decisive tactical effects through precise application of force, rather than through massed fires and attrition, is illustrated perfectly by what Ray accomplished. One gun, properly positioned and employed by a skilled crew, achieved effects that would have required an artillery battalion using less precise methods. The story of Ray Thompson and his December 18, 1944 engagement represents several important themes in military history and the experience of combat. It demonstrates that individual soldiers can have strategic impact, that skill and judgment matter as much as numbers and equipment, and that exceptional individuals exist in every war who accomplish things beyond what doctrine and training would predict. It also illustrates the gap between how we imagine combat and how it actually occurs. We think of battles as large organized clashes of armies, as products of strategic planning and logistics. And battles are those things. But they're also collections of small moments, individual decisions, personal actions that collectively determine outcomes. Ray Thompson's decision to fire that first shot was one such moment, a split-second choice by one person that rippled outward to affect the entire battle and the war beyond. The story reminds us that warfare, despite its technology and organization and doctrine, ultimately depends on people. On soldiers like Ray Thompson, who see what needs to be done and do it, who trust their judgment when it contradicts their orders, who execute skills with precision under the worst possible circumstances, who survive and come home and live quiet lives building good things. Ray never wanted to be remembered as a war hero. He wanted to be remembered as a good engineer, a good husband and father, a good citizen who contributed to his community. But he should also be remembered as an exceptional soldier who, on a frozen December morning in 1944, defied orders, trusted his instincts, and changed the course of a battle through skill, courage, and determination. The gunner who made the impossible shot, who made it 97 times in 43 minutes, who stopped a German armored column single-handedly, who survived the war and came home to build a good life, which was perhaps the greatest victory of all. In the Ardennes Forest, the road where Ray Thompson destroyed a German column on December 18, 1944, still exists. It's paved now, a minor highway through the Belgian countryside. Trees have grown over the scars of battle. The burned vehicles and destroyed equipment were cleared away decades ago. But if you know where to look, if you understand the geometry of the engagement, you can stand on the ridge where Ray positioned his Hellcat and see the road below. You can see the curve that created the kill box, the angles that allowed one gun to destroy an entire column. You can imagine a young sergeant from Kansas doing calculations in his head, making the decision to fire, to keep firing, to disobey orders because he saw what needed to be done. And you can understand that on this unremarkable stretch of road in Belgium, something remarkable happened. One soldier with extraordinary skill and courage changed the course of a battle, stopped an enemy attack, saved American lives, and helped win a war. That is the story of Ray Thompson, the gunner who defied orders, the soldier who trusted his instincts, the man who made the impossible shot and then went home to Kansas and never thought it was remarkable that he had changed history. But it was remarkable. It remains remarkable. And it deserves to be remembered, studied, and honored as an example of what individual courage and skill can accomplish. Even in the chaos and terror of war, even against overwhelming odds, even when doctrine and orders say something different. Ray Thompson, Technical Sergeant, later Second Lieutenant, U.S. Army, gunner, tank destroyer, farm boy from Kansas, exceptional soldier, quiet hero who never wanted the title but earned it in 43 minutes of perfect gunnery on a frozen December morning. The man who saved the day by making the impossible shot. And then went home and lived a good life, which was what all the fighting was for, really. The chance to come home and build something good. That was Ray Thompson. That is his legacy, and that is why his story matters and should never be forgotten.